Flemer III. He's going to reminisce about his life on the nursery and growing up in Kingston. It's all yours.
Well, the nursery was started by my grandfather in 1913 as a branch of his home nursery, which was up in Springfield, New Jersey. And he looked around for a new location because Springfield was growing up and you couldn't buy land anymore. So he looked in a circle around Springfield for a place that was a day's drive away or less with a team and wagon, because that's what transportation was there. So we finally settled on Princeton, on the Kingston area, and bought land there in 1913, and that's when this nursery was started. So it was important because it was on the canal, and the canal was still being used for transportation then, and things could be unloaded in the basin there at Kingston. And we used to get fertilizer and lime and whatnot on canal boats. And also it was on the branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was a branch line that went from Monmouth Junction up to Kingston through along the canal there. So in those days, trucks were very unreliable and only used for local transportation. So if you wanted to ship, which he did a lot of, you had to ship by rail. So we had our own siding built next to the packing shed there. We got material in by rail, and we shipped out a great deal, particularly out to the Midwest. So the nursery was founded, or started at the same year that St. Joseph's College was started. The Vincentian fathers bought those first two farms there and then started St. Joseph College. So both institutions started at the same time. So my grandfather bought this house, which is a very old one. It was built in 1742, so it's well prior to the American Revolution that it was built. It was built by a Dutchman named Matthias Van Dyke, and it was for a short time quarters for British officers. And apparently some patriots came in and fired at it with a cannonball. You could see a couple of places that were hit by cannonballs on the front surface there. Years ago, my dad did some work on the foundation here, and they dug up two cannonballs, which you can see behind me there, next to that window. So the house was in bad shape when my grandfather bought it, and the back walls were falling out, and it was in pretty bad shape, but he fixed it all up and settled in and lived here himself. Then my dad, my granddad came down, my dad came down to run the nursery, and he lived in the Higgins farm, boarded in the Higgins farm just down the road there. And he came down when he was 18 years old to run the nursery, which was very small then because it was just beginning. So then he ran the nursery for several years, and then got in the Army, went as an ambulance driver in the French Army, went overseas, and was there in 1917, 1918. Then he came back and got married. He lived up across the road for a while there in what was the Amar House. And then my grandfather moved back up to Springfield, and my dad moved in here. And so I and my two brothers were born here and raised here in this house. I can remember all sorts of it. I can remember as a very small boy sitting with my parents on a picnic down that way and seeing a canal boat go by being pulled by two white mules, in which they gave up mule So my dad used to get rides for us on a tugboat from Kingston going down to Trenton. Not all the time, but frequently. It was great fun. At that time the canal was open through to Trenton and then down into the Delaware River. And in those early days you could catch a passenger train from the Kingston station and take it out to Monmouth Junction and meet a train there and go into New York. So
Can I ask where the station was?
the station was down by the locks in Kingston, right down by the canal there.
First time we've heard that there was a station there.
Yeah. There are pictures of it in the Princeton Historical Society, I think, and it's worth looking up old Kingston pictures there. And they will have them duplicated, I think, for you. So I grew up here. Then we got into Depression years, and at the same time the Japanese beetle came on the scene, and we couldn't ship anywhere, couldn't even ship to New Brunswick at one point because they were trying to stop the spread of the beetle. So my dad went through very bad times there. He almost lost the nursery, and it really didn't do any better until World War I came along. World War II came along, and then things began to pick up. The country picked up, and you could sell nursery stock again. So I grew up here. I went to the Lawrenceville School. My dad traded trees for education, and then I went to Yale, and he traded trees for education there. So then in 1942 I volunteered in the Army, and then I went overseas and served in Europe until the end of the war. Came back in 1945, and at that point I took over supervision of the nursery under my dad's guidance, Mike Brabson's guidance, a lot of wonderful employees which he had then in those days. They were just the greatest men you could ever expect to find. So I moved in up at the in a house up on the hill there by the water tower. My dad had founded the Kingston Water Company, which we owned for years, and he got St. Joseph's was having big trouble with their water supply. The wells were always giving out, so they financed the company and owned half of it for quite a while. Then we supplied water to Kingston. Prior to that time, which was in 1934, I think, everybody had wells in Kingston, and there was some water pollution, so the water company was, it was welcomed by the town. So I ran the nursery with my dad, and then we sold land which we owned across the highway, and then my brother John and I bought land down in Allentown, New Jersey, and started a new nursery down there, which is about 20 miles away from here. So after my brother John died, then we had he died unexpectedly as a young man, 52. Then we had inheritance tax business. So there was no way that we could raise the money to pay the inheritance taxes on the thing, and so we had to sell the nursery to the university, which owns it now. And but we bought more land in Allentown, and that's where we still call it Princeton Nurseries, but it's in Allentown, New Jersey. So that's where we stand now. My son and my two daughters worked in the nursery and down there in Allentown. They lived down there. The firm is still going on. So that's about what I know. Are there any other things that you'd like to know?
Well, how many acres did you own in South Brunswick?
1,500.
And how about an
Part of that was in Plainsboro Township, because the next one was the house down the road. But mostly it's in South Brunswick Township. And we owned a lot of land over on Ridge Road there, over toward Monmouth Junction.
Do you have that many acres in Allentown?
We have 2,700 acres in Allentown. We bought more there. We just bought at the right time. It was kind of a forgotten place. You could buy good farms for $450 an acre. Can you imagine? So we wisely bought heavily while it was still inexpensive. It was better land than this too. No stones or just perfect topsoil all the way through.
I can remember my dad talking about the bare root freezers, and you built them. That was during World War II, wasn't it? Or was it sooner, earlier that you went into the bare root?
Oh, we always sold, when the nursery first started, everything was sold bare root. And only gradually did we begin to sell it with balls of earth. But your dad and your uncle and several other, a mason and a plumber and whatnot, built the cold storage buildings, which we used to store bare root stock. And that greatly extended the season in which we could sell, because we could keep bare root plants perfectly dormant until well into June, and also it enabled us to sell out more completely. Before then, when we didn't have refrigeration, when it got warm, they came out and leave, and at that point you couldn't sell them anymore. You either had to plant them out or throw them away. So cold storage was a big and important thing.
Well, also with us today are Jim Courtney and Joan Simon from the Shade Tree Commission. Joan's the chairperson, and she has some questions for you if you would like to ask her.
Can you tell us about the decision that was involved in developing new cultivars rather than just propagating what was readily available commercially?
Well, that was started by my dad, and then I really went into it on a big scale myself. But an analogy was that fruit trees for orchards. In colonial times, fruit trees were just, you planted out apple seeds or pear seeds and grew the plants. Most of the fruit that they grew was inferior or not good at all. So people began selecting the very best trees, like the Macintosh apple or Red Delicious or something, and grafting twigs of that on rootstocks of seedling trees. And it soon came to the point where nobody planted orchards of seedling trees anymore. So we applied that same principle to shade trees and flowering trees, and we began grafting and multiplying them by budding or grafting of the best kinds. Then in 1931, I think it was, the Plant Patent Act was passed by Congress, and at that point, if you had developed a new tree, you could get a patent on it, as you could if you developed a new machine or something and patented that. And so that was really important, because if you spent the time and money to develop something, why, you could get much more money for it than if anybody could grow it themselves. So the patents last 17 years from the time that you get it, and that gives you a chance to regulate the propagation, to license other nurseries to grow it in exchange for royalty payments. And in many ways, it's much like mechanical or chemical patents, but it applies to plants. And that's was for years quite unique to this country, but now there are patent laws in Germany and France and Europe.
How many patents does Princeton Nursery hold?
I myself got 47 patents, mostly on shade trees and flowering trees, but on a few shrubs too. Many of them have expired though. The 17 years have gone on by, so we still sell them with the patent name attached, but they're no longer under patent protection.
I notice in your catalog that only there you hold the patent to many more. Is there a reason for that?
Well, Mostly I've tried to name trees with a name that would be significant to the public, and not to name them for people, for instance. You know, there are a lot of roses that are named people's names, and that's really quite meaningless. So I've always tried to, in most cases, to have a name that, in a way, described the tree to the gardener who would want to plant it, like green spire linden, which is a narrow pyramidal linden tree. Looks like a spire of green. Or the Princeton Sentry ginkgo. Sentry is, you know, a tall, upright man. That was a narrow-growing ginkgo tree.
And I know over the years Princeton Nursery as an organization and Bill Flemer as an individual have received many awards. Could you tell us about some that meant the most to you?
Oh, I've received awards from the Garden Club of America for commercial horticulture, for introducing new varieties. I've gotten awards for being the president of the New Jersey Association of Nurserymen, and the Eastern Association of Nurserymen, and finally the National Association of Nurserymen. So it's been that kind of thing.
And I know the American Horticulture Society refers to you as Mr. Tree. When did that get started?
Refer to what?
They call you Mr. Tree.
Oh, that was about 15 years ago, right, when they gave me a very nice award.
Could you name a couple of your favorite cultivars that you've originated at Princeton Nursery?
Well, the first patent we got was a Shademaster locust, which is a honey locust, thornless and seedless honey locust tree. That kind of put that species on the map. Green spire linden is the #1 linden in this country and in Europe. That also. Let's see, October Glory, red maple, which is a late blooming, brilliant red. Every year, red maple. Those are, and then lately has been a green vase Zelkova tree, a tree that looks like an elm tree and has that same elm shape, but does not get Dutch elm disease. There are a lot of them planted in the town of Princeton, in fact all over the East Coast.
The vast majority of our new developments are planted with October Glory red maple.
Yeah.
So I'm sure the average homeowner, when they think of you, will probably be able to associate where that tree is from now.
That has been and continues to be extremely popular.
I know you've been growing trees for many years in this area. Are you seeing a change now because of pollution?
No, not so much from because of pollution. There's been a problem with reducing what's called the tree lawn between the sidewalk and the paved roadways, and those have, it seems to me, become reduced, and it's hard to grow big trees with such a small area for rain to get in. That's been a disadvantage. But pollution hasn't been very serious for trees.
When I walked in, I saw a file that said new and unusual trees. Could you tell us about any of them?
New and unusual?
Yeah, you had a file that I went past as I came in.
I was just giving a talk yesterday to the New Jersey Master Gardeners program, which has a big contingent from Middlesex County, incidentally. And that is a list of, is a series of slides showing new trees that mostly were developed by our nursery, but also by other nurseries in Canada and in Oregon and so on and so forth. And
anything commercially available now or still in the development stages?
oh, the ones that I show slides of are commercially available. Okay. Otherwise it doesn't pay to talk about them.
And will the time be coming when Princeton Nursery will no longer have a presence in South Jersey?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it doesn't now, really, because we have We had to sell the land, as I explained earlier. But we still own this house, and I live here. We still have the office building down there, but our office is now in Allentown. So. And we have our storage buildings also there.
Well, my concern for the tape we're doing for posterity, I thought it was important that people know that Princeton Nursery isn't just a regular nursery where they grow a couple ordinary trees, but it has been the largest landowner in South Brunswick, as well as a large employer of local people and a developer of new plant material, and has won fame throughout the world. But we're so used to Princeton Nursery being here, we don't give it its due.
Yeah. Well, it breaks my heart. There was just no other way to do about it.